How's everyone? Good morning? My Ukrainian is non-existent, so you're going to have to suffer through my poor English. And I've been known to cram a lot of stuff into talks and speak really, really fast. So I'm going to try not to do that today, but no promises. All right. So is everyone here? Everyone's ready for this? Yeah? You signed the disclaimer, the waiver at the door? No? I thought we had an agreement. All right. So this is just a quick shout out to essentially my sponsor, Pivotal, where I work, and allows me to travel the world and say words like I'm about to say. Has a mission to transform how the world builds software. We do a lot of things very opinionated way, really focused on agile practices. We practice XP in its purest form, pairing TDD all the time. And we also do some stuff with data and cloud platforms and Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes and the rest of that stuff, which is all fun and awesome. And we could talk about all that later. But my mission, personal mission, is to transform how the world operates software. And I believe that is supported by the last 10 years of my life. I've been working on some kind of system automation, large-scale infrastructure or web operation project, either that I owned or that I was helping people build for about 10 years. So I've been associated with Puppet as open source project, OpenStack, Cloud Foundry, more and more focus on Kubernetes. And then I've also been, as was mentioned a moment ago by Dan, trying to build this global community with DevOps Days as a core organizer of DevOps Days. And I want to start, because we're going to come back to this, and we only have one day. Often DevOps Days has the benefit of 2 days. And you have a cold start today if you're first open space. So I'm going to tell you right now that open space is the reason DevOps Days exists. And that it was all a scheme by me to have open space all over the world. But I knew you could not get people to come to an open space unless you also got people to come and speak. Because people's managers typically won't send them to events where they're just going to talk about whatever, which is what we're going to do at the end of the day, and it's going to be awesome. But that's that DevOps Days format of open space, which you're going to experience later, and having presentations. That was a little thing I came up with. And I've also been doing Velocity, which I think Velocity, honestly and arguably, was really the kind of the first DevOps event before DevOps Days. And again, I said I work for Pivotal. I wrote a book for O'Reilly about web operations. And then last but not least, I just want to point out, and there's some talks online given by not me about artisanal retrofuturism crossed with team-scale anarcho-syndicalism, which is very important. It's the best way to develop software. It's not even debatable. So go ahead and check that out later. You can say that, right? No? All right, this is the most important slide. This is my Twitter handle. And also, just to indicate what kind of narcissist you're actually dealing with today, I made a logo for myself, and that's my logo. So very important. If you want to get my attention, this is the fastest method. Send me a Twitter DM. I have open DMs, and I will typically respond much faster than I will if you email me, as Diana can attest to. And then it's also important to keep in mind, for future reference, that I come in various phases of beard and hair. So if you see me in the future and I look different, it's still the same crazy guy. Come talk to me. And last but not least, the internet is filled with me speaking faster than I'm speaking now. All sorts of topics ranging from there is no talent shortage to leading a learning organization. There's a talk that someone asked me to put stuff in about today that I didn't, about operability, which is a great talk that you should go watch later. You can slow it down when I speak too fast. So here, this is actually what I really believe, the most important DevOps stuff anyone can do. Ready? Learn how to read, learn how to write, learn how to speak, and last but not least, follow me on Twitter. So DevOps, what is this DevOps thing that's having these events? Why are we here? What does it mean? Well, this is what it means to me. And this is something I wrote in 2010. Developers and operations can and should work together. That's hopefully no longer controversial, but I still find pockets of resistance, especially if you're working in a more traditional manner. And then this was true in 2010, but is even more true today, that in a world where you can write against an API to provision machines, write against an API to configure machines, write against an API to monitor machines, write against an API to do every task that was associated with traditional system administration operations, then that act of writing against an API looks suspiciously like software development. And that we can use a lot of the tools and processes that were optimized for software development to accomplish our system administration. And then this is the final point, and this is part of why I'm willing to fly to Ukraine, is that this is a global community of practice, right? And it's one thing to be in the same room, and we have the benefit of that today, but there's people used to use IRC, now they use Slack for whatever reason, I don't understand, other than because it uses all the battery on my computer. But people will talk to you, right? My ability to solve problems is multiplied by the fact that I can jump into Slack and ask people questions about Kubernetes, about Docker, about Cloud Foundry, about Puppet, whatever. That's amazing. And take advantage of that. Take advantage of it with each other, and then take advantage of this global community. Because the problems that we're all trying to solve are not that different, right? And if we're connecting to those global communities of practice that have already solved these things that are essentially undifferentiating, then we're gonna all be better off. That's what it's about. So this is my updated, simplified definition of DevOps. DevOps is optimizing human performance and experience operating software. And that is against the backdrop of the fact that software is optimizing everything else at the same time. In Ukraine, I can pull out my supercomputer that I carry in my pocket that happens to be connected to a high-speed network, and I can push a button, and someone will come and get me in a car and take me to wherever I put the other side of it, right? You've used Uber before? Anyone? I was told by my host not to use the lowest option in Ukraine. I didn't test it yet, but I was told. So this is the backdrop of everything. Software is eating the world. Everything that can be optimized by software will be, and this is just part of it. So I'm also adding a few qualifiers. So DevOps to me is optimizing human performance and experience operating software with software. We're going to use software to do this, and with humans. So that's a full definition. So this is a quote, and I'm going to show two slides that I've shown other times, but what I want to call out here is the dates. So this is a slide, it's not written on the slide, that was a quote given in an interview in 2006. Right? And Dan just mentioned that the first DevOps days was in 2009. So this is 2006, and the next slide is 2007. So this is Werner Vogel's, and I'm going to read it out loud. The traditional model is that you take your software to the wall that separates development and operations and throw it over and then forget about it. Not at Amazon. You build it, you run it. This brings developers into contact with the day-to-day operation of their software. It also brings them into day-to-day contact with the customer. This customer feedback loop is essential for improving the quality of the service. So this is 2006. And at the time, this was quite mind-blowing for many people. Now this is almost table stakes, at least in the circles I run around in. And then this next one is from 2007, and this is something I've used in a lot of talks before. And this is actually from someone who came from Amazon at the time, is Jesse Robbins. Does anyone know who Jesse Robbins is by any chance? He's a co-founder of Chef. He used to run ops at Amazon, and he's also co-founder of Velocity Conference. So this is a blog post from 2007 where Jesse is arguing that the secret sauce for startups in Silicon Valley is this new way to do operations. Right, so 2007, Chef isn't actually released yet. Puppet's kind of a thing. Automation's definitely a thing. Velocity Conference is about to be a thing. So this is before DevOps is a word, right? And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But there's a big difference here, and the point that this is trying to make, between the amount of work that humans do. So on the left side, everything under the graph is the number of hours spent doing certain tasks. And what Jesse is trying to argue in this is that on the left side, the traditional way, there's more what I'll call toil, which I'm going to borrow from the SRE people. And on the right side, the secret sauce way, there's less toil. There's less work. If you do things a certain way, you can scale. So the x-axis here is the number of servers, the size of the infrastructure. You can scale and have less work, at least for humans. So that frees up humans to do things like be creative and not work, which is awesome if you're human. But the point here, two things. One is seems like that would be a competitive advantage. And I think that's played out. And I would argue that Amazon's advantage running a cloud infrastructure, which is probably also shared by people like Google, is not that they figured out how to put an API in front of a hypervisor so you could configure a virtual machine. It's that they had 15 years of experience running a massive web infrastructure, running a massive e-commerce infrastructure that led them to have this operational excellence that gives you these kinds of results. So this is not really debatable anymore. This is a screenshot from the 2017 DevOps survey. So Dora does a survey every year. They used to do it with Puppet. Now I think they're going to start doing it with Google. It's basically ask a bunch of questions and people answer them. And the data says that the teams that are faster are also safer. Right? So there's this argument people used to have about, we got to go slow, we got to have checklists, ITIL this, ITIL that, because if we go slow, we won't be down. And that's actually not true. The data says the teams that move the fastest are the safest. And you take that for granted if you use sites like Google. Everyone's using Google, right? In Ukraine, yeah? So this is, and you can go read the report. Has anyone ever read this, the DevOps survey? No? You can get it for free, so it's worth at least looking, especially if you want to argue with managers that don't want to do that. So this is a thing that I've been kind of wrestling with a little bit lately, because sometimes people will introduce me or Patrick and they'll say, you invented DevOps. It's like, no, not really. What I did is I stole everything. Right? I stole everything I could from watching people that were being successful with Puppet or inside of Amazon. Like if I could get someone who did something that I thought was awesome to explain how they did it, I would steal it. And I would tell everyone else how to do it too. Right? And that's really what I've done for the last 10 years. So if you look at the fact that Werner Vogels in 2006 is talking about developers taking call and the operational burden for their services 3 years before DevOps is a word, it's kind of hard to say that DevOps got invented in 2009. That's my argument. That these are simply the patterns that emerged in organizations that deliver highly available applications continuously at scale. There's a pressure to go faster, there's a pressure to be bigger, and a pressure to be more reliable. And if you don't change how you do things, and I'm arguing it's Darwinian. Does everyone know this word Darwinian? like Darwin, the evolution. So if you don't have the traits to evolve, then you just die, right? And so you couldn't build the Amazons, you couldn't build the Googles without these patterns. You couldn't build the Netflix, whatever the next wave of this is. And then people like to have these kind of link baity blog posts and arguments about, how DevOps will do against your mom or whatever. I don't quite understand why people do that, but it's fine. It's probably fine. What I'm going to argue is that all these buzzwords that people throw around lately, continuous delivery, microservices, DevOps, SRE, cloud native, are really all one thing. It's a bunch of blind people touching one elephant, and they're touching one different part of it, and they're like, yeah, this is continuous delivery. It's like, cool. So if you're going to continuously deliver microservices and you don't have automation and DevOps, like, you're done. Good luck. I mean, it's not just me saying this. So Martin Fowler had a blog post probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago now, where he said a prerequisite for doing microservices is a DevOps culture, right? That's a prerequisite. So why are we all here? We're going to continuously DevOps microservices or die trying, right? Who's with me? No. The other thing that is worth reflecting on is how this has all changed. The way I thought about the world, and I'm going to talk a little bit about unlearning in a sequence later, but the tools that are exciting and the tools and the capabilities, and especially when you start thinking about the toil on that graph from a minute ago, that you can get off GitHub today are very different than the tools that I was working on 10 years ago. And the tools that were available when DevOps first became a word. So I think that there's a tendency for certain people, and maybe especially certain vendors, to fixate on a particular tool, but that's limiting, and none of us should do that. We should try to pick the best tool that's available, the best tool that we understand how to use, and realize that the practice will be evolving over time. And that what we do today will probably look quite different in 2 years. It certainly looks quite different than it did 10 years ago, right? 2009, first DevOps days, very different landscape than we're all working on today, right? So these are things that are not set in stone. DevOps is not set in stone. DevOps will evolve. This was by design. This is a feature, not a bug, and we will not fix it. DevOps is learning. It's also unlearning. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that means to me. So there's a time when, and I actually said this out loud, you should automate all the things. But I came to realize that what you automate is as important as the fact that you do sometimes, right? And that there's architectures that will fight against you. So this is me in 2009. Woo! Automate all the things, right? I got all these tools, I can automate them. So this is automation, right? That's automation, right? That's clearly a manual script that he runs from his home directory. There's a person that has to do something, and then there's some tools, kicks off a thing. Can everyone understand what that's trying to do? It's trying to clean him. It's the napkin. So that's not automation. This is automation. We make the robots do it. Because robots are good at doing the same thing over and over, right? But that kind of misses the opportunity to revisit, especially if your goal is to build more reliable systems that you can recover and do this kind of scaling dynamically with, that there's architectures that will resist automation. They will resist recovery, and that you should be thoughtful when you have a complicated state-dependent thing that you have to do this in this order and then that in this order to get it set up in the first place, that is the lower bound for how fast you can recover all that when it eventually fails. Does anyone have that at their work? You seen this movie before? Yeah? So whenever I have an opportunity to do a new project with someone and they know what is there, what I encourage people to do is think about why it's there. Because if you understand why it exists, you can go back and maybe think about parts that don't need to exist or how we could do this differently. If you're just trying to automate the thing that exists that is there and put the robots in the middle, then it's not as awesome as it could be. So now we have containers. And we're just going to put the robots in the containers. And if Tetris has taught me anything, it's that errors pile up and accomplishments disappear. You know this game, right? Close to your heart. I'm sure some of you have experienced this or are about to. And just for the record, to put it out there, Docker will not fix your broken architecture, and it won't fix your broken culture, and sadly, neither will Kubernetes. The best solution is smart people working together with each other and technology. Is there any smart people in the room? Are there any smart people in the room that refuse to work with other smart people? Have you ever met someone that is brilliant and cannot figure out how to align with other people and do the right thing? Seen that movie? It's sad. I don't understand why people do that. But it does happen. Don't be that person. So this to me is DevOps. Smart people solving problems with other smart people. Aligning with the technology, with each other, to solve these problems, to get those numbers, right? We just saw this data point. This survey says, this is the data, it's faster, it's safer, go save the world, right? This is obvious. DevOps has become more obvious. It's an existential Darwinian force to become capable to do these things. It's more necessary. It's more legitimate, right? So DevOps is becoming legitimate. And I know that's true because I see, executives talk about it. So everyone wants this, right? Everyone wants this. They want the fast, they want the safe. And it all just starts to sound like pandas vomiting rainbows. Because it's not always like that. And what they actually want, what they really want, scalability, availability, reliability, operability, usability, observability, probably more ilities and itities that we could list. They want it all for free and without changing anything. I've actually had this conversation more than once where you look at what people are doing and they want to be, competitive with this thing and they hire you and they pay you money and you tell them, all this stuff that they're doing and how they could do it different and they're like, how could we do DevOps but we don't want to be different? It's like, just pay me. I'm out. I'll leave. It's fine. So just to make that point more clear, I'm going to make the text bigger. And what I came to realize after being frustrated with it for quite a time, so this is not just DevOps. This is literally just how humans innovate or how they adopt innovations. So is everyone familiar with the crossing the chasm metaphor? This curve of innovation, early adopters, early majority. You seen this before? So the idea and the thing that started to explain something that really frustrated me, in the circles I run in and the people that I work with sometimes, you're really inspired and you see people do great stuff, and then you start to get into the more traditional organizations and the enterprise, and they're like, yeah, we do Agile. What did you actually change? Nothing. We put Scrum Master on our old product manager's title. Well, okay. Now you're doing DevOps because you put DevOps on someone's title. So did you change anything about your change management? Did you change anything about your automation? Did you change anything about your monitoring? Did you change anything at all? No, we're good. We got the DevOps. We got it on, it's on my business card, so it must be working. And what I came to realize, and this was introduced to one of my friends, and since I started adding this to my conversations, a number of academics have come up and talked to me because they're fascinated with this. It's called institutionalization theory. And what this slide is trying to show here is that in the early phases, the innovators and the early adopters are motivated for the advantage, right? So we already saw data a minute ago about DevOps and the metrics and the advantage that people are getting. And the motivation for early adopters is that advantage. At some point, that advantage is obvious. We have the data, we see it. And then there's this notion of legitimacy, and what happens is that the late majority is not actually motivated to get an advantage. What they're motivated by, what they're seeking, is legitimacy. And as a consequence of seeking legitimacy and not advantage, they don't get an advantage. Funny how that works. Now, the beauty of this is these things just keep coming, right? This is changing fast, right? So this is like all these waves of innovation are just coming. And it's like, I don't have anything to do except keep up with all this, and I could barely keep up with all this, right? So this is a very famous painting of the Mongolians invading Japan and getting crushed by the tsunami. So do you want to be on those boats, or do you want to be this guy, right? So surfing the waves. Has anyone ever been surfing? Tried it? I lived in LA for almost 2 years, and I tried to go surfing, and it is hard. With a capital H, hard. It beat me up. I mean, I'll go back and try it again anytime, but it is work, right? You get out on the waves, and you don't spend most of your time looking like this. You spend most of your time like getting tumbled upside down and like coughing because your lungs are filled with water. So here's another little secret for you. Software is hard. It was always hard. And people talk about, DevOps and all these numbers and the pen is vomiting rainbows, but it often felt a lot more like this. And there's mud and there's blood, and that's actually a picture of me trying to manage an OpenStack cluster. And I talk to people all the time, and they're like, we have this solution to manage this stateful service at scale. And I'm like, well, have you thought about how it's going to fail? And they're like, no, we haven't, but we're going to jump in there anyway. This is a metaphor for that engineering approach, actually. And this is a true story. If you Google this story, you can find this guy. He was warned there's an alligator, and they said, don't jump in there because the alligator might kill you. And he's like, F that alligator. And he lived for another 11 seconds after that. So these are the 5 stages of DevOps that I've seen. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So I'm only mostly joking, mostly. And this is just the stuff that we still see all the time, right? We have the traditional dev and ops, and we put a wall of confusion in between, and we make each other communicate with tickets, and they're not even human, and then pretty soon people are unhappy, and then, bad things happen. Because we've actually set it up where we're not recognizing the higher mission of the organization, right? We have 2 opposing forces. Everything the devs do changes things, destabilizes. Everything the ops do stabilizes. And in the worst cases, you've actually got financial incentives, right? You're changing what people get paid based on how some of this works. And so you're not going to have a great time because you're not aligning the humans with each other and the software. Because software's hard, but damn, humans is harder. Because there's also these opposing forces. On one side, you have humans, which are awesome, and on the other side, you have humans, which is terrible. Right? Anyone ever seen this movie? Which side are you on? Because it turns out we're the problem. In both, you're the one in all of your bad relationships, right? We're also the solution. And there's only us. Like, no one else is going to fix this for us. And then this is just a guess, but I'm going to go on a limb and say you are probably human. Could go either way. And this is one of my favorite qualities of being a human, is that humans can learn. And I think humans love to learn. I love to learn stuff. Some do. So this is something that I made a theme for a lot of my talks for the last few years, but I just want to share it with you because I'm going to come back to it by the end more than once. And that is that you haven't learned anything until your behavior actually changes. So this is really easy to prove when you're talking about something that is competitive, like chess, or that is somewhat demonstrable, like music, right? If you want to learn a song, you could play the song or you can't, right? If you want to play chess, you could beat players at a certain rating or you can't. But when you want to have, new skills in your organization that are kind of soft and squishy and DevOps related, then ends up being hard to measure sometimes and a little bit too philosophical, and especially hard if all you did was put DevOps on your title and didn't change anything. So maybe change something? Who knows? And this is one of my friends, but you might work with this person either sometime in the past or sometime in the future. Hopefully it's not you. But there's this other little tendency that we see in our organizations and in our industry that people, first of all, there's the cult of busy, and we got to look busy. Doesn't really matter what the impact is or what work we're getting done, but we got to look busy. And then there's this other thing that people attach their identity to their task. So you say, this happened all the time in the early days of Puppet, and it still happens in conversations right now, where you have systems people, and they're like, I'm not a developer. Well, why? Why do you think that? You don't write code? Well, I don't want to learn Git. I don't want to learn Ruby. Okay, I don't want to learn Ruby anymore either, but that's a different topic. If you're not going to learn, if you're not going to change your behavior, then you're not going to be as awesome as you could be. And you're not going to make the world as awesome for me as you could be making it, right? Because one of my motivations here is that you go build something that lets me do things like push a button and have a car come get me. Like, let's just optimize all of that, and I need your help here to pull that off. So these problems, they're not technical, they're not people, they're socio-technical, right? So when people talk about, there's this pendulum that people have in the DevOps conversation where there'll be a talk, it'll be really tools focused, and people say it's too much talk about tools. And then someone else will give a talk and it's all culture, and people, that's too much culture. It's like, well, you kind of got to mix it all together and make it actually work, because you cannot solve these problems without the people, and you cannot solve these problems without the technology. If you look at the way these things are done at all the most successful examples, they recognize humans are a first-class part of that system, right? They talk about things like burnout. They talk about things like the burden and the toil of being on call. And if you're not going to recognize the humans in that equation, you're not going to be able to solve it. At the same time, technical excellence goes a long way. And no amount of focusing on your feelings is going to fix your, whatever problems with your code. So this problem is our opportunity. I'm very fond of saying this, but I hope you can internalize it. And I didn't spend a lot of time today talking about what I think some of the principles are, but hopefully you got some of it. But I want you to think about the tools last. The tools are the least important thing. The most important thing are the principles. And if the principles are understood, the practices will be obvious, and the tools will be necessary. But if you just focus on the tools, you're not going to get good results. You might have a Tetris game or two to play later, but. And related to that, your mindset is more important than your skill set, is more important than your tool set. I would much rather have people that are curious and able to learn than I would have someone who's an expert in a specific thing, unless I need just to answer one question about that specific thing and then never talk to you again. Adapt is greater than adopt. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and I didn't spend a ton of time on this in today's presentation, but a lot of times people are giving DevOps conversations or DevOps presentations about their startup or about their work, like actually people's jobs to give these talks now. And the advice they're giving you may have nothing to do with your context. And if you try to copy them without the same context, you're going to fail because everything they said did not apply to you. So think about the principles and adapt that to what is going on in your context instead of just try to adopt what people say. Why is more important than what? So, coming to the end, DevOps is you. DevOps is me. DevOps is us. And welcome to the community. It's great to be here. Thanks to the hosts and the organizers again. Let's actually give them a quick round of applause. And now the hard work begins, right? So whatever happens today, remember there's plenty of mud and blood back wherever you work on Monday. And the question I want you to answer for yourself when you leave today and come back through whatever else you see in the conversations that we have by the end of the day is what are you going to do differently? What behaviors are you going to change? And what are we going to do differently? So thank you for your time. I'm not here to answer questions. I'm here to have conversations. And I have a little bonus material to set up the open space. So I work for Pivotal. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it, blah, blah, blah. And here's your homework. I bet you didn't know you're going to get homework. So this is 3 chapters from a book you can read for free that was written by Google. Your homework is to read Embracing Risk, Service Level Objectives, and Eliminating Toil. And you might not be able to read them by the time we get to open space, but I'm proposing that we have an open space to talk about service level objectives because I think it is the most elegant solution to this DevOps tension between Dev and Ops. I love it because it makes everything driven by metrics and totally dispassionate. You can read this book for free online. If you search for SRE book, you can, I know the internet works in Ukraine because I used it all night and this morning. So I know you can get to this. You can read it for free. It's awesome. It is Google's DevOps implementation. So for a minute, people were saying DevOps versus SRE, and this is the difference. And now you have Google very clearly saying, this is our DevOps. So this is how Google does DevOps. They wrote a book about it, and it's pretty awesome. Again, remember what I said a minute ago. Your context is not Google, so some of it might not translate directly, but it is free as in beer, and you should get it. And then coming soon, and I just wrote a foreword for them for this book, the Site Reliability Workbook, is Google writing a book to try to make it actually more actionable. And today, in the open space, first proposal, Just keep it in mind because Dan's gonna explain how this works, and I'll come back and pitch it again if I need to. Service level objectives is the truth and the light. Who wants to talk about it? So again, thank you for your time, and we'll turn it back over to the host and get on with our program.
Andrew, just wait. We still have like 10 minutes left for you, and
I thought
maybe
I had 40 minutes, and I've spoken for 39.
yeah. I mean, Dan did it like 10 minutes earlier. So maybe you would like to hear any questions from the audience.
I'll take
if
any
there's
questions
any.
from the audience. I would love to take questions. I thought I was out of time.
So anyone, guys? Hello.
We have a
one
winner.
question. One question. Maybe two.
Ukraine is mostly outsourcing, outstaffing, full of outsourcing and outstaffing companies. How we can do DevOps in this environment?
This is actually a really hard question. Extremely hard question. So let's go back to, let's see, just one of these. So when you have outsourcing relationship and you have a contractual, there's actually a document that has words about what's going to be delivered when and how much money is involved, then you've essentially set up a dynamic where one side, and actually both sides, are basically trying to do the least and get the most, right? And so you have to either, I mean, the easy answer, which is probably not going to work for all of you, is seize the means of production and build your own startups, build your own ecosystem. That would be perfect answer in a perfect world. In reality, you can't always do that, and there's calculus to like feed your kids, right? And you gotta pay the bills and you gotta keep that light on. So what I try to help people think about is there some way that we can set up that contractual relationship that will prevent some of the problems that we keep happening all the time? Because we're actually against each other in some sense, right? Because, and it gets even more confusing when you start talking about this scaling and the DevOps, metrics. Because if you're on a contract that says that we are going to deploy this thing, like, what do I care about day 2? What do I care about the ongoing cost of operations? Because my contract, my contractual relationship with you does not support me caring about that, right? So and maybe that could change if you actually start to demonstrate that we can build things in a way that have these properties and they're lower, and then you can start to win other contracts. But in the actual context of that engagement, it could be really, really tough because you want to get paid and you want to be done, and then you want to go on to the next one, and day 2 doesn't matter. So if that stuff's on fire the minute after they sign the check, like, it's not your problem, right? It's the same. It's actually the same cycle and the same reason Werner Vogels argues that developers should be on call, because they have a feedback loop, right? So you own this thing because, and we want to move that feedback loop to that person who can make the best decisions going forward, because they can make the best decisions and they can take direct action. If you don't have that feedback loop, then there's really no way. So I basically made a long answer to say it's very, very difficult if you're only in an outsourcing relationship, and if you can recognize this struggle. So you're all smart people, hopefully. We kind of already went through that. And you're hoping for the best outcome for your customers, right? So find ways to align, or you are the customer working with outsourcing. Find ways to realize very explicitly what these contractual things are setting up. Are they creating opposing forces where we're going to be against each other? And then be mindful about what those are and try to eliminate them in the actual contract. Because at the end of the day, as soon as there's money involved, like, people get crazy, right? And the decisions they're going to make are going to be optimized for winning that game of getting paid and getting paid more later. So I don't know. I mean, that's probably not a satisfying answer, but remember the mud and blood? It's like that. It's all mud and blood.
Any more questions, guys? Okay.
So first of all, thank you for your speech.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, my question is there a possibility to implement DevOps practice if you're like the only person in the company who knows this and who trying to implement this? Do I need support from management? Do I need some other stuff like this?
So the answer is, it is possible, but it is improbable. So the reality is that if you don't have any support from management and you're trying to change a bunch of behaviors, even if you know that it's a better way, then you're probably going to be squashed as a rebellion. Or potentially, I might have seen that movie before. What you can do though is figure out ways to not be the only person. And just like everything else in the world, this is the part where I said learn how to speak and learn how to write. You need to communicate. So if we start with this assumption that DevOps is all about communicating, helping people communicate, then as a single person, you can start to influence other people. You can start to convince other people, and you have to sell that idea and build a bubble of people that are able and willing to do that. At some point, so this is a very famous quote, and I learned this, and I'm not actually sure of the source because I've seen attribution for more than one source, but I learned it in the context of Agile. And the advice is that you should change your organization, or you should change your organization, which means you have only one life that you can spend on this planet, and if you can make progress helping the organization that you're in improve, and that's meaningful to you, then you should do that. And if you can't, then you should find another organization that wants to do that or has already done that. So I don't know, again, it's mud and blood everywhere. So that's the theme, mud and blood.
Thanks. We still have 5 minutes and another question from here.
Hi, it's a really nice speech. I have a question about the future of DevOps. Do you think we will see some things like market ops or dev market or dev PR or something like that, or
so
not?
this is where the whole thing, I mean, part of it is like, these are words, right? Like, what do words mean? And if you think about how this got to where it is, or if I think about how it got to where it is, DevOps to me is about systems, inputs and outputs, and optimizing the system. And I just happen to be working on Puppet with a domain that's really focused on Dev and Ops. But for me, it's really about systems thinking in the large. So marketing, I think it's annoying and clumsy when people are like DevSecOps. Like, that sounds stupid. But like, it's also a meaningful conversation to include security. There's a meaningful conversation. I used to have a slide that had the wall of confusion. So I drew the wall of confusion here. There's like developers and operations, the wall of confusion. And I would put the rest of the org, and I'd put all the rest of the walls, right? So there's like a wall of confusion between marketing and sales. There's a wall of confusion between marketing and product. There's a wall of confusion between product management and development, R&D. And then you have QA. And all these things are not necessarily aligned any more than Dev and Ops ever were. So I would say, yes, there's a huge opportunity. And if you want to go look at the literature and some of the stuff that led to the DevOps conversations, then go read Deming. Go read the Senge book, The Fifth Discipline. Because at the end of the day, here's another thing about, I'm going to make another comment about people inventing DevOps. So it's kind of funny to watch. Does anyone know who Edward Deming is? So a quick story. So Deming was first he started as a statistician, but then he started doing this kind of statistical process control and really focused on quality. And this is a simplification of the story, but during the First World War, Deming was consulting with a bunch of these factories. And he taught them essentially how to do the same thing we're talking about. Align people, focus on quality, focus on communication, focus on the mission, and you're going to get good results. And they got amazing results. And then the war ended, and all the men that were in the military came back, and they were used to their command and control structures. And they're like, that sounds like a great idea for women, but we got this because we know, how to be like soldiers or whatever. And so Deming had to leave the US, go to Japan, teach the Japanese about all these same principles. There's actually a prize in Japan, the Deming Award, for this innovation, for these kind of cultural things. And no one in the US really knew about Deming again until the Japanese were kicking the crap out of our auto industry 20 years later. So the reason I tell this story is none of this stuff's new. Like there's certain ways that people can work together that's better. There's certain ways that people communicate together that's better. And it gets better results, and it's provably better results. And I can't quite explain it, but it seems like every other generation or so, everyone just forgets that, and the autocrats win, and you just go back to the same like broken silos. So I don't know if it's going to be for real this time, or if DevOps is the right banner to wave for that. But yes, you need to break down all these things in every part of your org and get everyone working together because you want to win. I mean, to me, it's about the competitive advantage. I put the slide before about seeking competitive advantage. I want to build high-performing organizations, and I want that high performance across every aspect of my organization. Marketing, sales, as well as anything to do with the technology.
Thank you. And time's up, people. We invite you to the coffee break, and if you still have any questions, you can catch Andrew somewhere near the
Thanks
coffee
again.
pint.
Another big round of applause for the organizers.